Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Welcome to Sekhet-Maat Lodge's continuing series on little essays toward truth. This week we are talking about energy, and my cat is wandering in and out, so you may see or hear from him. Don't be disturbed. He always sounds like the world is ending. I promise he's okay. Currently a dues-paying member of Sekhet-Maat, we would sincerely appreciate your suggested donation of $10. If you have $10,000, if you have $5, we'll take whatever you give us. And this money is being used to fund our current expenses so that we don't lose our storage spaces during the pandemic, and we are saving up money to move into our own space so that when all of this nonsense is over, we can also have class and do rituals in person. I usually have a disclaimer slide. This is the one for today. Most important things are that it is highly likely at some point you will disagree or be offended, especially if you have any design sensibilities at all whatsoever about you. Your mileage may vary. You're here of your own free will, so I'm cool with you disagreeing with me. Just let's keep it respectful. And as always, there will be no discussion of any material that is specific to an initiation or a degree. So Little Essays Toward Truth are a series of 16 essays written by Aleister Crowley. We've gone through 9. We are now on essay number 10. If you're interested in seeing the lectures from the previous sections, all but 2 of them are available on the YouTube channel, so I highly recommend that you check that out. The 2 essays that are not will likely be recorded afterwards at a later date so that those materials will also be available. So, as I start out every class, I look at the topic that is the title of the essay, energy. What the hell is energy? Seriously, when I say energy, tell me what it means. Anybody, what you got? No wrong answers. Energy is...
uncondensed matter.
Okay, good. What else? Anyone?
A catch-all abstraction that we use.
Okay. Heat. What else?
Energy is a life force in everyone.
Life force. I like that. So just as there was initially this pregnant pause, when I sat down to say, oh, well, everyone knows what energy is, right? I mean, energy, like we use the word all the time. And then I thought about it and I'm like, well, is this energy? This is the ATP cycle involved in muscular energy production. Is this energy, the Krebs cycle, that thing from biology class? What about this? This is a chemistry thing where when you break bonds, they make energy, but it doesn't tell you what energy is. It just tells you where it's stored. Is this energy? Seriously, what the hell is energy?
I'm like, from that point of view, it's almost like a waveform.
Energy could be in a waveform, but it could also be in other forms too, right?
Basically, to me, Makai, I kept bringing it back to the closest association we have with energy, and that's matter.
But matter technically is not all by itself energy, and we wouldn't have...
It is not. Matter is different, but the distinction, I mean, like when we, that's to me, the narrative of us and our understanding of it.
Totally valid.
Right?
Totally valid.
So.
I was trying to find a way to define energy that did not include using some variation of the word energy and didn't use anything too slippery to try to say, well, energy is, it's like this, or it's sort of that, or well, one form of it is. So I looked at the etymology. I know you're all shocked if you've attended any of these prior sessions. And I found it really interesting that there were 2 different Greek roots listed. I just picked the one here that's in the Oxford reference. From 2 Greek roots, en meaning within, and ergon meaning work. So it's something about a concept of being within work. It's something within work. That then became a Greek word that then moved into late Latin because, the conquering and the taking over of the kingdoms and whatnot. Eventually, the French picked up a word that's very similar to our energy, and in English, the word energy as a separate word emerged in the mid-16th century, so 1500s, you do your history, you can figure out what's going on. I tend to blame the Norman Conquest for all of how we got French, but any French words in English, but your mileage may vary. So then I looked up energy in the Oxford English Dictionary. Energy is a noun. And none of these definitions helped me get any closer to figuring out what energy is, right? The Oxford English Dictionary lists its definitions in order of past usage and how common it is. So the most common usage, according to the OED, is with reference to speech or writing, force or vigor of expression. Okay, this calls to mind a specific section of the Book of the Law to me, but that's not about energy. And by the way, the word energy never appears in the Book of the Law. Okay, what about the secondary definition? It's the impressiveness of an event, but it's an obscure, not really in use definition. Not helpful. Exercise of power, actual working, operation, activity, frequently in philosophical language. Okay, I don't want philosophical language. Tell me what the hell energy really is. Effectual operation or efficacy. Okay, also obsolete. How about the third definition? Vigor of intensity of action, utterance. Well, that sounds a lot like 1A, and it still isn't getting me anywhere. Okay, on to 4. Power actively and efficiently displayed or exerted. Okay, energy is power. I can kind of buy that. That's getting closer-ish, maybe? Individual power in exercise or activities. All right, maybe. I liked the 5th definition the best of all of them. Your mileage may vary. You might like one of the others better, but the 5th definition is power not necessarily manifested in action, the ability or capacity to produce effect. So to me, this brings out the idea of power, but it doesn't have to be manifest. And the other definitions that talk about power talk about being active and being efficiently displayed. But energy can also be something that's held in reserve. So the idea that it's power, but not necessarily manifest power, really resonated with me personally. The 6th definition is all about physics and various sciencey things. I included this for completeness' sake, but essentially it has to do with power of doing work, potential possessed at any instant by a body or system of bodies. So this is the whole like, object in motion tends to stay in motion thing. You have that, or object at rest in this case could potentially be moving if some force acts on it, blah, 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 whatever. And it's suggested as a name for momentum. The very last entry for energy, 6D, was mental energy, which I thought interesting. So we're taking, to the extent you think of energy as being mental, it's really the least common method of usage. And you'll notice that most of the earlier definitions deal with energy in a doing, an active sense, and a physical sense, or a something moving, right? As opposed to your brain or mental energy, which maybe moves, but I can't see it and you can't see it. So there's no way of me to perceive your mental energy necessarily. Then I decided to look at energize, which is a verb. It comes in 2 senses. The transitive form, which takes a direct object, is to rouse something into energy or activity, to call it into active operation. So I can verb with my energy by essentially calling on you to do something active, putting energy in you or getting you to bring your energy up, to infuse energy into or supply with energy. And that is now especially used in technical terms. And then the intransitive version is to be in active operation or to put forth energy or exercise your powers. So it would be sort of a energize yourself or energize something that's not a direct object that you're acting on personally. So per usual, I like to see what it was Crowley would have had to in his wheelhouse about energy as he was growing up. And since he grew up Plymouth Brethren, I looked to the King James Bible, which they would have had in their Sunday services, and also the Darby Bible, which they would have had for home study and home reading. However, there were 0 hits on my searches. The Darby Bible and the King James Bible do not use the word energy. So I went to another Bible search website. There's a ton of them, by the way. It's one nice thing about the internet age is that if you want to know whether a term is used in any given text, someone has probably already made it searchable for you. So the only reference I could find was in the New International Version of the Bible. And I am not the theologian who can give us the background on this, but Colossians is a letter from one of the apostles talking about Christ and the church and why he's doing what he's doing. And the end of the first chapter is verse 29. To this end, I strenuously contend with all the energy Christ so powerfully works in me. And that is the only reference to energy I was able to find in the Bible. So in order to find out more about what this concept of energy is, I looked at what the Darby Bible and the King James Bible used in this exact same verse. The Darby Bible gave us whereunto toil, combating according to his working, which works in me power. So we have both the idea of actual, like doing a work, right? Toiling, that's a hands-on something, right? And then power being worked from within, which is perhaps a kind of reserve energy, right? The King James Version, far more florally, is whereunto I also labor, striving according to his working, which worketh in me mightily. I think it's not a King James quote unless you have a "the" or a verb that ends in "eth," worketh, doeth, prayeth. So the Bible's not very useful in telling us about energy. Bummer. So let's look at what Crowley had to say about tarot. The aces, as you know, are the root of each of the small card suits. I'm going to have to move you guys over so I can see this. So let's start with the Ace of Wands. These are all quotes from the Thoth Tarot from the book that Crowley wrote. The Ace of Wands is the first card in the first small card suit that Crowley discusses after he goes through the major arcana. He refers to the Ace of Wands as the primordial energy, capital E, of the divine, manifesting in matter at so early a stage that it is not yet definitely formulated, as will. So here we have Thomas's idea of energy and matter being together within the Ace of Wands. Moving to the left to the Ace of Cups, this card is the feminine complement of the Ace of Wands. It represents the essential form of the Holy Grail. There is no use of the word energy in the description of the Ace of Cups, which I thought was very interesting. Moving to the Ace of Swords, Crowley describes the Ace of Swords as the primordial energy of air. And with the Ace of Discs, Crowley describes the Ace of Discs as picturing the entry of that type of energy, which is called Earth. So I don't know if this was on purpose or if this is just how things happen to shake out, but the Ace of Cups is the only one of the 4 ace cards that Crowley did not use the word energy in his description. For what that might be worth, I thought it was interesting. So where have we seen energy before? Now, as I mentioned, this is essay number 10 of 16. And if you've attended any of the prior classes or watched the prior videos, you'll notice that I tend to go through and look to see where Crowley repeats the same concept within a work or in other works. For example, when we were talking about sorrow and when we were talking about beatitude, both of those essays have references to other little essays within them. So in order to fully understand what we're about to read about energy, I thought we should take a look back at what we've already read about energy. So the first essay is called Man. And in Man, Crowley uses the word energy exactly once. He uses it when he's describing Chia, the creative impulse or will of Yakida, the energy which demands the formulation of the coordinate axes, blah, 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 so that Yakida may obtain self-realization. So Chia lives in Chokmah. For those of you who are not super duper familiar with the Tree of Life, I promise there'll be a picture shortly. But if you have that little Essays Toward Truth book in front of you, you can open it to the beginning portion, which has the Tree of Life diagram, or if you have one handy, you can whip it out. Chokmah is not the top, but the first one over to the right and down a little bit. The next essay where Crowley mentions the word energy is not in memory, which is the next essay, but in sorrow, which is the third essay. In it, he's discussing the concept of the Buddhist Sabe Pi Dukkam, everything is sorrow. And I left a larger quote here so you have some context, but essentially the idea is that it's not really a paradox that everything is sorrow, because every reaction produces consciousness. All consciousness is a disturbance of peace, or anything that happens is a disturbance of like the equilibrium, or if you prefer it, obstructions to the free flow of energy. And I'll note here that Crowley capitalized the word energy in his use in the essay Sorrow. The next essay, number 4, is titled Wonder. And in Wonder, Crowley refers to energy in the concept of meditation. Let it be known, each such step in meditation is itself a motive energy, capital E, capable of inducing the trance of wonder. So we've now hit 4 essays in the series. There are only 3 mentions of energy, and within Sorrow and Wonder, it's capitalized. So I would argue that these capitals referring to energy as a concept are going to be directly relevant to the essay that we're reading today. Continuing in Wonder, Crowley continues to discuss the trance of wonder and uses the word energy to describe the effects of the trance of wonder. Occurrence floods the mind with creative energy, in capitals. The 5th essay, Beatitude, uses the word energy twice, once capitalized and once not. In discussing the beatific vision, Crowley says that the formula of this vision is love is a law, love under will, and that its nature is the perpetual sacrament of energy in action. So we've seen that somehow energy is related to sorrow, to wonder, and to beatitude. Crowley also uses energy in the beatitude. How well, I'll just read the quote. You can explain it to yourself. In fact, it may be surmised that the vision, that would be the beatific vision, arises not from any given action, but rather from a subtle suspension of action. The conflict of events has ended happily in a state of serenely perfect balance in which, though energy continues to manifest, its issues have become without significance. The essays on laughter and indifference include 0 references to the word energy, capitalized or uncapitalized. Moving on to the essay on mastery, Crowley uses energy, capital E, when he's discussing the Magus of the gods. The Magus of the gods, with his one word that seems to overturn the chariot of mankind in ruin, does not in fact destroy or even alter anything. He simply furnishes a new mode of applying existing energy to established forms. Oops, let's go down, not up. Page down. Nope. Yep, that's it. That's where we got. No, there's no reference to energy in trance, which is the 9th essay, and here we are in energy, the 10th. So as long as we're taking a little romp through little essays toward truth, before we read today's essay on energy, let's see where that concept will play in the remaining 6 essays. The concept of energy does not appear, or the word energy specifically does not appear anywhere in the next 2 essays on knowledge and understanding. The next references are in the essay titled Chastity, which is going to be a lot of fun because the modern Western concept of chastity and the chastity which Crowley is discussing are, of course, not the same thing. So the word chastity appears several times. He talks about chastity as the chastity whose magical energy both protects and urges the aspirant to the sacred mysteries. So we know that magical energy is part of a specific type of chastity that we're going to read about later. Crowley also mentions the strong innocence of Harpocrates and of his energy of silence. Remembering, of course, that to keep silent is one of the powers of the Sphinx. This may turn out to be interesting once we hit the chastity essay. In addition, there's a section where Crowley is talking about action and inaction. And the third quote on this page is, "Beware of abstinence of action. Is it not written in our election? For the nature of the universe, being creative energy, aught else blasphemes the goddess and seeks to introduce the elements of a real death within the pulses of life." So here we have the idea of the nature of the universe being creative energy. And this is a concept that has been alluded to, but perhaps not worded exactly in this way up to this point. There's also a concept in this essay on chastity. He's referring to the knight errant of the stars. His innocence melts with its white hot energy, capital E, the felon fetters of that restriction, which is sin. So energy is a tool, a weapon, a property that we can use to overcome the word of restriction, which is sin. Finally, there are just two more references to energy. One in the essay on silence, in which Crowley is referring to the crowned and conquering child, whose name is force and fire, whose subtlety and strength make sure serenity, whose energy and endurance accomplish the attainment of the virgin of the absolute. He goes on to make reference to Pan, so don't get too excited about that reference to virgin in its typical Western sense. That's not what he's talking about. And then finally, in the essay on love, Crowley refers to energy, little e. Love is clear-sighted with the lust of deadly rage, anatomizing its victim with keen energy. So let's see what's in the actual essay. This particular graphic is my indicator for all of the slides today that have the essay on them. Where there are words that are added or there are editorials, I have done my best to make it very clear what Crowley wrote and what I added or modified. If the slide does not have this icon on it somewhere, you'll see there's a standard format, then it is not part of the essay. Like, you haven't seen it yet, here it is. All right. So, Jeff, will you take that first paragraph, please?
Sure. Energy is the sacramental motive of event. It is thus omnipresent in manifestation by interruption and compensation, and otherwise by the corresponding withdrawal. In this connection, let there be remembered the full formula of tetragrammaton.
In one sentence, Crowley has just given us a ton of stuff to unpack. And I haven't said this yet, but this is the first of the essays that I have not really enjoyed. This is the first essay that I sort of dreaded putting together. And as I worked through it, just found it difficult and kind of sludgy. So if you attempted to read it and felt the same way, I feel you. So sacramental motive of event, what the hell is that all about? Well, okay, sacramental, not very useful as a definition. Relating to or constituting a sacrament. Thanks dictionary. But if you think about sacrament as something that's used in a specific way as a tool, like sacramental wine or sacramental cakes of light, that may give you a better definition. And just remembering that the word sacrament has roots that go with sacred and sacrifice. In the Christian background, if you were raised in the Church of England or in the Episcopal Church, and I think also in the Catholic Church, you may have been taught that a sacrament is an outward and physical sign of inward and spiritual grace. It's also the name of the religious ceremony or rite that is regarded as imparting some kind of divine grace. And so if you think about the sacrament, the sacramental wine and the sacramental cake of light as the sacrament, consumption of those may be seen as imparting divine grace. So here at the bottom, I've broken down the history of the word sacrament. We have the Latin sacer and sacrare, so a sacred, a noun, or an adjective, and sacrare, to hallow, mixed with the Greek mysterion, which is related to mystery. We got sacramentum in Latin for a solemn oath or a sacred, hallowed mystery relating to some undertaking. Christianized Latin throws it into Old French. We get what essentially becomes the word sacrament in Middle English. Again, I blame the Normans for all of this. So my commentary on this was, all right, first we got to break down what the hell sacramental motive of event is, right? So what's a motive? It's your reason for doing something. So what is a sacramental motive? What you got? Sacramental motive. If sacramental is of or pertaining to a sacrament, like sacramental wine and sacramental cookies, what is a sacramental motive?
The desire to obtain divine grace.
Good idea. Anyone else? I don't have an answer, by the way. That's why I'm asking you.
I was thinking more of like he's talking about any event, like, you know, the sun shines and that energy is sacramental, but we benefit from it. So
Excellent.
Yeah, one could argue that sunshine is the ultimate sacrament, given the inspiration, that it provides to the flora and fauna on this planet.
What is a sacramental motive, right? The reason for something happening.
Your invocation.
Anybody else? Anything else? Other ideas? I think this is a really important concept. Like, I'm belaboring the heck out of this because this energy is about, this essay is about energy, and Crowley has just given us the definition he's going to talk about. So rather than skip over this, oh my God, he used all these 50-cent words and threw them together and tetragrammaton and what the fuck, right? We got to unpack this up front, and the rest of the essay will go a lot more smoothly. So think, anybody have anything else to add? Going once?
Well, I mean, he almost talks about it like I said, I wish that it's the product. Energy is the product of an event. So in some sense, you can look at any event, and he didn't really go into what event is here. And energy is the magical product of that event. To me, it kind of looks like, well, we can look at any event as some way to maybe harvest or take energy from it, or look at it as energy.
Sure, this is all true. But Crowley's also saying that energy is the reason events happen. Anybody else? Last chance before I hit the button. And that's
Yes.
not to, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I was going to add to this is that there's also other scripture, like in the New World Translation, a very popular use for the word energy occurs somewhere in, actually, I think it's one of the letters from Paul that we already, but Paul mentions, due to God being abundant in dynamic energy, and that the result of that was literally the starry night sky and the heavens. Okay, so you're taking this association of energy, so like that's almost like the creative force in that context.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just
Thank you for that addition.
I had some other thought too.
Yeah, please share.
Could it also be a form of imbalance where, if you tilt if you've got a surface with a ball on it and you tilt it, then that ball's going to want to roll down.
Absolutely. And in some of the ways that Crowley has used energy and the concept of events in the other essays, he talks about energy being sort of even and balanced and nothing happens. And then there is a disturbance or a force that acts upon that energy, an event, right? And then that event is something happening. So what else is happening here? In this connection of energy as sacramental motive of event, we have to remember the full formula of tetragrammaton, which is way beyond the scope of this class here today. So I will point you to some resources when we get to the works cited, where you can read to your heart's content about everything Crowley had to say about tetragrammaton and more. But briefly, Tetragrammaton is 4 letters. The initial yod or yod over on the right hand is manifestation. And the final he is the withdrawal or dissolution. And so in between, I sort of chose these as my preferred current terms, not necessarily as the be all end all. Remember, I don't have all the answers yet. You have the manifestation of something. You have its flow or its union, its expansion, and then contraction, withdrawal, dissolution. And the cycle then begins again with the new manifestation. So we have the idea of energy as sacramental motive of event doing this, right? Energy as a manifestation. It's a thing that's going to happen. There's a flow, the thing happens, and then we're done. And then there can be a new manifestation. Questions, comments, read remarks, because that's just what I came up with out of my own head.
I'm like, that sounds a lot like you just described how internal combustion engine works.
Well, I mean, doesn't the internal combustion engine getting turned on, that's energy, or it's getting something is sparking it, whatever, to make it go. And then it goes and it does its thing and then you turn it off. And then later on you can turn it back on. So I'd say that's totally fair.
I mean, yeah, you have your cycle of the energy gets put into the thing, you have your spark, it expands, and then there's the next cycle. So yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Right, magic's not that different from science exactly. And what is it Crowley said? The motto of the AA, the aim of religion, the method of science. Something to think about. All right, let's move back to our essay. Wendy, will you take these next paragraphs? And by the way, these are broken out into paragraphs in the essay itself. These are not paragraphs that I created.
There are, however, 3 main types of special experience which are noteworthy landmarks in the process of initiation and of urgent practical value to the magician. The symbol of the sacrament being observed, they differ as do the 3 participants therein, the god, the priest, and the communicant. In the highest, that of Kether, the energy radiates wholly from oneself, that is, one is entirely identified with Hadit. In the middle, that of Chokmah, the energy passes wholly through oneself, that is, one assumes the functions of Tahuti. In the lowest, that of Geburah, the energy impinges wholly upon oneself, that is, one absorbs it as a man.
Okay, we have a few things to unpack. 3 of them, actually. So Crowley says, in the highest, that of Kether, crown. These colors are merely for convenience and because I could read through them, by the way. They're not intended to represent any particular color scale or magical correspondences. So the highest is Kether, the crown. The middle, notice where it's located, is Chokmah. Remember, we had a little prefiguration of Chokmah here. And then the lowest is in Geburah. In between Chokmah and Geburah, remember, that is where the abyss exists. So hearkening back to our first essay where we talked a lot of Kabbalah and the structure of the soul, or the parts of man, I should say. In between the Chokmah Bina layer up there at the top, and that blue dot that is Geburah is the abyss. And everything that is above the abyss is unmanifest. It is some kind of energy, experience, facts, stuff that our incarnate human brains don't quite grok. Everything below the abyss is manifestation. So if you remember back to the first essay on man, Crowley talks, and you can whip out your, if you've got the book, there's that nice little diagram in the front, but Crowley talks about Kether, that Yakaida, as being like the God spark, right? That then moves down into that archetypal world of Chia, which is in Chokmah. It then slides over to Bina, which we're not talking about here. and moves across the abyss. So in Geburah is then in the formative or in the manifest world. But wait, there's more. Made a little chart of some more correspondences. So for the parts of the soul, right, Kether is Yakaida. It's that little God seed coming from those three veils that are beyond what we think of as, or what we can conceive of, I should say. Like the everything, the everything, and the nothing everything all at the same time. Moving down to Hokmah. Hokmah is in Chia, which is the part of the soul of man that is the creative impulse, or the divine will. And these are all shorthand, remember. You got to go back to the essay on man if you want all the dirt, but this is just to get you a little how energies particular essay. Chia is in Atziluth, which is the archetypal world. So it's all archetypes. We're not yet into physical bodies or any of that good stuff. Geburah, down there, strength, is part of the Ruach. Now, the Ruach is centered on that middle Tiferath, which is sort of one diagonal to the right from the blue spot. And the Ruach is the ego, or the mind, spirit, intellect, right? It's those five Sephiroth all together. Geburah is in the manifest world. It's in Yetzirah, or the formative world. And in terms of the Yod He Vav He formula, notice that Hokmah is in Yod and Geburah is in Vav. So in this discussion of energy, Crowley has left out what corresponds to the two He's on the Tree of Life. Before we move further, does anyone have any other observations they'd like to offer on how these three pieces relate to each other based on what Crowley has given us so far? Okay, I'll throw a little more at you. Actually, Crowley will. Jeff, take it away, please.
In all cases, the energy of which it is here written is not particular, or personified. It is energy in itself without quality. The highest mode can only be fully apprehended by an epistemic. It is the final attainment. It is the active counterpart of the higher form of the beatific vision. The middle mode is proper to a magus, or to one aspiring to his prophetic function. It is described and the method of attaining it set forth in the book called Opus Lutetinum. The lowest mode is the peculiar task of a major adept. It is best accomplished by means of the secret of the sanctuary of the gnosis, 9th degree of the OTO.
So again, we have reference to those three forms: the highest, middle, and lowest. I put together a cute little chart here so we know all of the things that Crowley has said so far. So on the low end, we have the communicant as a participant in the sacrament. That's what's on the tree in blue. The energy impinges wholly on itself. Man absorbs it. It is associated with the peculiar task of the major adept, which is a grade in the AA, and that's associated with Geburah, so that's probably why they go together here. And Crowley says it is best accomplished by the secret of the sanctuary of the gnosis. It's interesting that he says that. And the reason that it's interesting is that in the scheme of the OTO degree system, for some reason, in modern life, we think that the goal is to get to the top of every pyramid. But the problem is that in an organization like the OTO that has a sort of pyramid function with, the 10th degree at the top, who's the king of the country, we don't need a bunch of 10th degrees running around, right? You take the 10th degree because that's going to be your job. So in the system of degrees of the OTO, Crowley has expressly written that the natural stopping place for most men and women is the 5th degree, not the 9th degree. So it's interesting that Crowley is saying the lowest form here is hanging out with something that is best accomplished by a secret that allegedly you cannot find out or won't be told until you hit 9th degree. Your mileage may vary. We're not discussing that part. Middle corresponds to priest, to the priest participating in the sacrament. So if you think about the Gnostic Mass, this would be a good example. I've made Hokmah red, and the energy Crowley describes as passes through oneself, one assumes the functions of Tahuti. So instead of being a man on the low end absorbing the energy, in the middle, you are assuming the functions of Tahuti. Quick quiz. Who the heck is Tahuti and what does he do? Anybody?
He's Thoth or Tot, the messenger god Hermes.
Okay, what else? Anyone? What's he the god of? What's he do?
He's the great teacher. He's often seen as being synonymous with Hermes Trismegistus,
Mhm.
The founder of Hermeticism.
What else? These are all good. I'm not saying what else because I'm looking for
Correlates to a
specific-
Babylonian god by the name of Nebo.
Okay. Anything else?
Mathematics, magic.
Math and magic and writing, communication, right? So all of these concepts go together here. These are the things, the functions of Tahuti, right? Math, magic, teaching, messengering. Crowley said this is proper to a magus, but he also said not just a magus, right? Like on the low end of this, he described this energy as being the peculiar task of a major adept, right? Something that is specific to the Adeptus major degree in the AA system. But here in the middle, he says it's proper to a magus or to one aspiring to his prophetic function. And he describes this, the best way to accomplish this as using the Paris working. Opus Lutetinum, I think, not sure, is also known as the Paris working. So that's what most people tend to call it because we can't pronounce Lutetinum. So if you're looking for it online, it will be called the Paris working. Finally, on the high end, this is the participant in the sacrament. If you want to think of this in terms of Gnostic Mass, that might be a good way to go about it. But the high form is the God participating in the sacrament. It is associated with Kether, which I've marked here in yellow. And in this sense, Crowley said the energy radiates from the self. So we've gone from absorbing to passing energy through to radiating that energy. From the self, wholly identified with Hadit. Quick quiz. Who's Hadit? What's he do? Why do we care? Anyone?
He's the ubiquitous point of view.
Excellent. Hadit is a point as opposed to Nuit is all the expansive space. Hadit is the first like individualized function, right? This is that God seed as opposed to all the stuff that is and isn't and could be and could not be God altogether. Crowley says that this is only fully apprehended by an ipsissimus. He doesn't say it's not apprehendable at all unless you happen to be there. He says it's only fully apprehended. So just like with the middle path that is proper to a magus or to one aspiring to his prophetic function, here on the high end, this particular energy is only fully apprehended by an ipsissimus, but we may have a possibility of glimpsing part of it for the rest of us mere mortals. And finally, Crowley refers to this high as the final attainment, the active counterpart of the higher beatific vision, which we discussed a little in the essay on beatitude. All right, before I move on, does anyone have anything they'd like to add or to ask? I don't promise to have an answer, but I promise to let you talk. All right, then, we'll move on. This is one paragraph, and I have broken it up into 3 colors for reasons that should be obvious. Jeff, will you take this, please?
Of the highest mode, it would be neither fit or useful to treat more intimately. The middle mode concerns each magician in his peculiar and private relationship with the infinite and demands from each of its adepts a special preoccupation. But of the lowest, it is convenient to make further mention.
Essentially, the rest of the essay is going to be about this top bar, this lowest energetic experience of the communicant, of Gebura, of absorbing the energy, the peculiar task of the major adept best accomplished by the secret sanctuary of the Gnosis. Wendy, will you take the next paragraph, please?
It is strangely convincing proof of the true care of nature for her instruments, despite the superficial evidence to the contrary on which the doctrines of pessimism are based, that the most precious, the one ultimately essential grace that can be possibly bestowed on mankind is, of all magical benefit, that which may be attained with more ease and certainty than any other. For energy is itself all that is, and we vary with the quantity and quality thereof, which we can call ourselves.
This particular paragraph is one of the paragraphs that makes me wish that Crowley just dropped footnotes instead of trying to put every particular idea in the same sentence all together. But this is what we get. This paragraph takes up almost 10 lines maybe more than 10 lines actually in the original text. So it's pretty big and fat. So what is up with this? The last part's the easy part. Energy is itself all that is. Great. So like me and you and we and us, we're energy. Cool. But what's with all of this proof of nature for her instruments and stuff? So what I personally unpacked, and again, your mileage may vary because I am not the expert on this essay. Humans, Crowley is asserting, are instruments of nature. Assuming that by nature, he's using nature as a substitute for what most of Western religion would call God, what I like to think of as the thing beyond all the things that are no things and, way up off the tree beyond that third veil. The grace of nature is that divine grace, in the sense of we started out talking about a sacrament as a way to partake of a measure of divine grace. So I would rewrite this by saying, the definition of divine grace, it's a theological term that is present in many religions, primarily Western ones, but not exclusively. It is the divine influence that operates in humans to regenerate and sanctify, to inspire virtuous impulses, and to impart strength to endure trial and resist temptation, and as an individual virtue or excellence of divine origin. So there are a lot of concepts sort of mixed up in here. You can set aside, for thelemic purposes, the idea of virtuous impulses, because we don't have a like thou shalt and thou shalt not exactly the same way that the most religious and philosophical systems do. But if you want to think of divine grace as a part of God, the big G, God, that you get to partake of yourself. Any thoughts on this great, gigantic, mega sentence or this paragraph? Or, feel free to speak off the top of your head because I don't expect anyone's really prepared remarks. All right, then. The two paragraphs at the top, please, Jeff.
The price which she demands is without doubt heavy enough for a certain class, but it is equally to be paid in varying degree for every type of mystical and magical adventure. This price is in essence the full understanding of the mind of nature herself and the complete sympathy with her way of work.
I created a break in the paragraph here because another concept starts with the next sentence. And I found this a convenient place to break. So that's why that comma's there. My thought on this was, okay, so we're not talking about energy and this, we exist as energy as just some gift or something. This is a transaction, right? Kind of like when an event happens, there's energy that is the motive of it happening, and then there's an energy that's the result of that event, or there's a change in energy as a result of that event. So here we have this transaction where in exchange for existing, maybe in exchange for having that sacramental aspect, that grace, perhaps for having energy at all, which would go back to existing at all, that there's a price that you pay. Okay, what is the price? According to Crowley, it is understanding the mind of nature and complete sympathy with her way of work. Can anyone tell me what that means? or what you think it means, or what it might mean, or, anything along those lines.
I mean, it comes to mind with me that it's kind of like Goethe would say, to not ignore phenomena. So think more Taoist, think more the way that nature works.
Good thought. Anyone else?
It might be something like giving up one's preconceived notions of justice in favor of like equilibrium, where like I'm thinking of the way Crowley changed the justice card into the adjustment card.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent observation. And in connection with what you were just saying, right, that made me think, well, I don't really like that the hawk eats the cute little fuzzy bunny, but I do want the hawk to be alive. And so, like, some bunnies got to die in the process. That's just how it is. And I may think it's a great injustice that, the oldest rabbit is the one that gets eaten, or the baby rabbit is the one that gets eaten. But, like, nature doesn't have my idea of what the best idea is. There are rules that are nothing to do with whether I find that particular rabbit cute.
I mean, this is kind of piggybacking to the last paragraph, but I wasn't quick enough. But it seems also that it might be in contrast to what he called the doctrines of pessimism. But I never did get a good understanding of what that was outside of my own projection.
Yeah. In fact, let's take a quick look at that. It is strangely convincing proof of the true care of nature for her instruments. Positive, or positive-ish sounding, right? Despite the superficial evidence to the contrary on which the doctrines of pessimism are based, right? That's all that cute little bunny and oh damn, a hawk's eating it, right? That seems like, man, nature's a bitch, right? But like, if the hawk doesn't get to eat the bunny, the hawk's gonna die, and that's a bitch too. So, like, what are you gonna do?
I thought the doctrines of pessimism that kind of reminds me of experiences I've had with people having different beliefs than me. So like something that I believe is to be true on a magical sense, and if people decide not to believe that, like they'll never see it because they have like a pessimistic view of whatever I believe, in a way, I guess.
That's certainly one way of looking at this. I think Crowley specifically mentions the doctrines of pessimism to make a contrast for some kind of evidence that makes it look like nature doesn't care, right? Because he sets up proof of the true care of nature for her instruments, despite superficial evidence to the contrary, right? God has abandoned me because I am a poor baby bunny being eaten by a hawk. Oh no, that is not how it goes. Does that make sense? Or kind of like jive with what you're saying?
I mean, I think that makes sense. I don't know. I'm like, I don't know if it jives with exactly what I was saying, but I guess it can in a way. Depends how you look at it.
Of course. That's the fun of Crowley, right? Read the paragraph once, get 14 ideas about what it means.
Yeah. It just basically, it sounds, I'm summing this down to like, wow, the universe is a chaotic place, and it may not be as safe and warm and fuzzy as you would like it sometimes to be.
But that doesn't mean that nature doesn't care, or that God has abandoned you, or that God is dead. We want to go full Nietzsche.
Absolutely.
So, the price.
Brutal but beautiful.
Yes, I like that. Brutal but beautiful. So the price. Full understanding of the mind of nature herself, in capitals, understanding mind, nature herself, and complete sympathy with her way of work. Okay. Wendy, will you take the next few paragraphs, please?
All the moral codes of mankind, for all their absurd diversities, have one common factor. They pretend to have found motives and methods which are superior to hers. That is, they presume a conception of the end which is beyond her view. They assert the possession of an intelligence loftier than that which has produced the universe. Consider only that the highest manifestation possible on the rational mind is a discovery of the laws which summarize her manner of operation. We may then say at once that all such pretentious arrogance is impudence and absurdity, and it must be surrendered, nay more, uprooted and calcined, before any serious progress can be made in the royal and sacerdotal art. Hence also any aspiration of a particular order, any which depends for its wisdom on the justice of our perceptions of our own needs, is almost certain to be tainted with the very poison of which nature would purge us.
So you can see I made the division in that top paragraph because it went from talking about the price that we pay, being full understanding and full sympathy, to talking about the moral codes of mankind, right? And I love this idea that the moral codes of mankind presume a conception of the end that is beyond her view and assert that they are smarter and more intelligent than the universe. This is the well-meaning vegan who wants her cat to be a vegan. For those of you who don't know, cats are obligate carnivores. There are 2 amino acids that are only found in meat that cats must eat, or they do not lead full, healthy lives. Like, cats gotta kill stuff. That's what they do. They're furry little killers, right? Okay, so we get to this big fat paragraph where Crowley has to throw down as many 50-cent words as he possibly can. So let's break this up. All such pretentious arrogance is impudence and absurdity. Okay, so the moral codes of mankind that are thinking they know more than the universe does or have a better idea of the universe than nature, what a goofy idea is that, right? Human moral codes are arrogant, period, hard stop. So Crowley says it must be surrendered, nay, more, uprooted, and reduced, oxidized, or desiccated by roasting or exposing to strong heat. Burn that shit down, right? Moral codes of humans, burn that shit down. That's what he's saying. Why he needed so many words, it's Crowley, okay? Just, you get what you get. So you got to burn down that shit before you can make any serious progress in magic, the royal and sacerdotal priestly art, okay? Before you can make any progress in magic, you got to burn down these human moral codes. Wait, what? Okay. So any aspiration that is of a partial order, and what are we aspiring to? We are aspiring to a full comprehension of the nature of the universe and sympathy with her means of going about doing things. Any partial aspiration, like I'm just going to kind of stick my toe in there, right? That partial aspiration depends for its wisdom on my perception of my needs. Well, I don't want my cat to be a carnivore. That's mean, right? It's almost certain to be tainted with the very poison of which nature would purge us. My moral code does not apply to my cat. That's the example. Sorry, it always comes back to my cat. It just does. That's the example that comes most readily to mind. But if you've got others, I would be delighted to hear them. Or really, any commentary or thoughts that you have on this section.
Yeah, I think he's completely wrong, and that if he's right that humans are an expression of energy and nature, then I think it follows that our ideas are also an expression of nature. So, you know, if we've come this far and we have this vantage point where we can look back on the world and see, you know, some subjective things about what we don't like about it, I think that's just as legitimate as the unconscious factors that, you know, gave rise to them in the first place, and that we have every right to exert some kind of moral sense of order on the chaos that we perceive, because it's not wrong that we perceive it. We're made to perceive it by nature. And to respond to the cat thing, absolutely right. I mean, there might be exceptions. I'm sure that they're tinkering with amino acids and plants to try to get that to work. But in the long run, there's a way around it. Get your cats neutered, and then we won't have, millions of little predators running around. We won't have to feed them millions of factory farmed animals, billions even. And, if we just, you take care of the problem bit by bit as we feel the moral energy to do, then the world gets better.
I love that. And can I ask you a follow-up question? Okay, so are you talking about you, human, being the end product of the evolution of mankind as being part of nature and thus getting to define your own moral code? Or are you talking about moral code of mankind, society tells me X, Y, Z?
Well, mostly from the first perspective, but from the first thing that you said, but it's impossible to be completely free from the influences of society.
Right now, Thomas, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I think, Wendy, I would just totally say you're absolutely right. And, as an evolved, our process of evolution is a natural part of the phenomenon of the universe, so our progress is not negative. For me, letting go of our concepts of what our evolution should be is part of the magical act of getting to where Crowley's talking about. So it's not necessarily whether or not it's like we have to abolish these things in our mind, but in a magical practice, if you want to get to the next level, you damn well better be able to let go of them momentarily.
And I really like that explanation, because when one of our bishops, Kathy, talks about, look, when you stand up and you recite the creed at the beginning of Mass, you are essentially saying, for the next 45 minutes to an hour, I agree that these are the conditions under which we're operating. And then she'll say, do you have to walk out of the temple and hold all of those truths to be self-evident? No. But to participate in the magical operation of the Mass, right, we all have to be on the same page. So we all recite the creed. For the next 45 to 60 minutes, we agree these are the rules that we're operating in, right?
Also, I mean, this is kind of maybe to the left of this a little bit, but I would also say, considering what he probably thought of as science at the time, that he would include science in those moral codes too. And I think we can see the result of, thinking that we're above the cycles of nature and taking our science to different directions. So I think he would include science as one of the moral codes that mankind is dealing with.
Sure. I mean, and you can look at a moral code as being something very big and broad, like killing other people, not a great idea, right? But in general, you don't need a religion to decide that somebody shouldn't murder you and you shouldn't murder somebody else, right? You can have that as an understanding of operating in this plane without having a religion teach you, thou shalt not kill, right? But at the same time, that's a big general rule, and we can all agree that there are situations where if I killed somebody, it would be justified, right? If someone's coming at me with a knife and they're going to stab me and I shoot them, most of you are probably going to be okay with that. That's the moral code. But so is, ladies shouldn't show their ankles and should wear voluminous petticoats along with their long skirts, right? So moral code is a really big term. Jeff, you were going to jump in?
Well, not really. I mean, kind of with the same idea. It's also, and this is not popular maybe with some people, but it's also a moral code that has been thrown at us, that we are all isolated little monads of consciousness in there all by ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's not really science. That's a moral code.
Yeah.
So I would say it can extend to a lot of different areas, and I really like the idea that he brings an idea of possibly how those codes could go out of balance.
Yeah. Other thoughts about moral codes or anything related to this section?
I was gonna say that I think moral code is interesting because it's something that we partially could change throughout our lifetime, but at the same time, something that we learn from our parents. So it's just, yeah, it's a compiled but also learned concept that we as humans generally share. But if somebody grew up without that influence, they would have, no idea. They would just choose their own rules, I would suppose. So,
It's pretty much baked in the cake at every level.
Say more, please.
No, just kind of going on that, like, the idea that there are, I mean, the animal kingdom has its own moral code outside of ours, even though we are a member of the animal kingdom. So this whole thing is like at every single level, there's just something going on with like what Jeff brought out was, we're all these little monads and we're all shaping our own moral code while having it shaped upon us by our physical surroundings and our contact and how we actually go about interacting with the universe.
And this goes back to what Dimitri was saying about how your moral code can evolve or change throughout your life. And if I were a more clever magician than I am, I would make a great joke about moral codes being set in stone because, the 10 Commandments were carved into stones. But I don't have it in me right now, so it's not going to happen.
Nice connection, so I like it.
All right, let's move on. Jeff, I think it's your turn. Would you take these, please?
Sure. There is, in fact, only one magical operation of whose propriety we may always be sure, and that is the increase of our sum of energy. It is even indiscreet to try to specify the kind of energy required, and worse to consider any particular purpose. Energy being increased, nature will herself supply clarity. Our vision is obscure only because our energy is deficient. For energy is the substance of the universe. When it is adequate, we are in no doubt as to how to employ it. Witness the evident case of the will of the adolescent. It is also to be well noted that moral obstruction to the right use of this energy cause at once the most hideous deformations of character and determine the gravest lesions of the nervous system.
I specifically cut these two pieces together because here's a ballsy statement. There is one magical operation, only one, says Crowley, that we can always be sure is proper. Only one. And that is to increase your sum of energy, period. All other magical operations are suspect. The only one that is always proper is to get more energy. And he won't even talk about what kind of energy he's talking about or like what you might use it for.
Well, what just popped into my head is the association with energy and the HGA. And I'll leave it at that.
Oh, okay.
Just the one magical operation to increase in is energy. In my mind, it's not very difficult to, what's the one primary thing that most people in this, in this little chat box right now are attempting to attain? On some level, if they identify with doing the great work, it's knowledge and conversation. So I'm just kind of, I'm just fusing some ideas right now.
Yeah. So if the first paragraph essentially says, look, the only thing you can do that's not suspect of being improper in some way, right, is increase energy. That's it. Increase energy, totally proper. The next paragraph says energy being increased nature will herself supply clarity. Our vision, big V, is obscure only because our energy, big E, is deficient. So in a way, Thomas, I see this sentence about energy being increased, nature will herself supply clarity, as being, look, if you build up your energy and you achieve knowledge and conversation, right? Nature supplies clarity. Your HGA will tell you what the fuck to do with the energy, so you don't have to worry about it right now. But then Crowley says, look, when you have enough energy, you know what to do. And he points to the will of teenagers as an example. Witness the evident case of the will of the adolescent. Somebody tell me what teenagers do.
They're compulsive.
What else?
They break shit.
What else? Come on, everybody else jump in. Teenagers, come on, you were one, tell me.
Masturbate.
What else?
I guess maybe they like to be playful, and then I don't know. Older adolescents, tend to get physically active with each other or all that.
They rebel.
They rebel. What happens in adolescence in terms of the development of a human being? You start to separate yourself very strongly from your parents. I'm not going to do that. You push the boundaries. You start trying to make your own rules or negotiate what the rules are. Well, if I do the dishes, can I stay out 15 minutes later? Right? If I show you I have all my homework done, can I go to the movies with my friends? If I can pay for it, can I get a car? Right? This is the adolescent part of human development, especially in our current Western society. Like, that's when you first start testing the waters of being an adult, right? Your frontal cortex isn't fully 100% formed. You've got the influences of your parents and society and whatever books you've read and teachers and stuff kind of all around you. And that's the point when you're like, oh, I get to choose. Or maybe you're being told you can't choose and you're like, fuck that, I can choose. Or maybe you're being told you can't choose and you're like, but this will of the adolescent, right? This is the separation of the child from the parent as a being in a way that's different from, weaning from your mother physically. This is like, adolescence is, back in the day, you could be married at 14 or 15, right? This is the point when you're like becoming your own independent, in gigantic air quotes, because we're not really all little individual monads, but you're becoming your own independent person. Thoughts, comments? I could be wrong. Who knows?
Yeah.
Now, talk to me about this moral obstruction, because remember, all these moral codes from humans, they're kind of just a load of stuff, right? Moral obstruction to the right use of this energy cause at once the most hideous deformations of character and determine the gravest lesions of the nervous system. What's Crowley pointing to? Anybody?
When they try to force kids to stop being gay.
Yes, great, excellent example. What else?
I mean, you could tie just about any social norm to that if that social norm is not in alignment with the true will of the individual.
Can you explain further, or would you please explain further?
I mean, sexuality, marital status, child rearing status, financial status, I mean, there's all of these social norms, and they're going to vary from community to community and family to family and group to group, like us, but all of those influences.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think just, talking about constriction in general.
Sure.
I think it's interesting that it brings in the adolescent idea into it, and then talks about the obstruction, because like it in a way it makes me wonder about, like, I guess, changing your moral whatever, yeah, the moral constructs. So in that way it makes me think about that, or like, how religions love saying that one is better than the other for whatever reason.
Yep. If you read this paragraph as being purely about sexual energy, right? Let's take a go at it that way. Sexual energy being increased. Nature will herself supply clarity. Our vision is obscure only because our sexual energy is deficient. For sexual energy is the substance of the universe. When it is adequate, we are in no doubt as to how to employ it. Witness the evident case of the will of the adolescent, right? One of the things that teenagers do is they like make out and touch each other and like have sex and stuff. Not all of them, but right? Once that's there, moral obstruction to the right use of that energy, right? You can't be gay. What happens to kids who are put in gay conversion therapy? Lots of them kill themselves. Lots of them have all, think about the other ways that energy can be employed that are destructive when they're not being put to their right use. Think about I can't believe nobody said this, so I'm going to say it. Churches that require priests to be celibate tend to have a lot of sex scandals for some reason, right? When the right use of that energy is obstructed by a moral objection, you get a hideous deformation of character, and you get nervous issues. Think about, the era Crowley was living in, women still, had the vapors and had fainting couches and stuff. All right, I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but that gave me this whole essay gave me a lot to chew on. All right, Wendy, will you take the next paragraphs, please?
Could I actually say something about the previous one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. I think that the way that he's using nature here is kind of a double-edged sword, because in the previous one that I commented on, and by the way, I really liked everybody's responses, it was sort of like, it was a different issue where it's about the relationships between predator and prey, and what are we going to do when something's got to eat? But then this is a completely different issue, sexuality. And I'm not educated enough to say with confidence where this stigma against homosexuality came from, but I think that it might not be a coincidence that scientists can look at nature and go, okay, the way that things reproduce, or most of them, is heterosexual. And so therefore it's natural to be heterosexual. And so then they take this wrong course of logic into thinking that must mean that it's unnatural to be homosexual. And so it sounds like they might be, I'm just kind of guessing, misapplying this principle of nature, that this conclusion that they've erroneously come to onto their population. And so I just think, my only point is that I think we need to be careful what we project onto nature and what we think about that. And, what does it even mean to get back down to our roots, if we have some kind of preconceived notion of what those roots are.
I really think that comes back to what Jeff was saying about how the scientific method and scientific theories are also an extension of morality. In that, just as an example, we look at the majority as being the normal, right? The majority of people can hear, so that makes hearing normal. The majority of people can't have 2 legs that work and 2 arms that work, so that's normal. And then the thing that we decide is abnormal, right, gets treated as though it's literally a freak of nature, because we've decided that, well, for whatever reason, the thing that is in the majority must be the good thing, and the other thing somehow becomes the bad thing, right? And that's definitely an imposition of morality on an existing natural thing, right? There's no reason why we should look at someone who is deaf as being other or being not normal or not natural, but for most of history, that's been the case. And it's wrong. But that's what we've done. So anyway, new paragraph.
That sounds like the typical versus the divergent. So, but and then what Wendy was saying, it made me think of, like, I think scientifically we've looked at nature and have done, okay, well, this union has a purpose, right, to advance, to keep the human civilization going. So anything outside of that and doesn't have a purpose, it must not be right to do. You can't just have fun. You must serve a purpose. So I think that kind of purpose serving sort of makes you right, and not purpose serving makes you wrong. And I think that's a really strange concept when you really dive into it, but it's where humanity has been for a really long time.
Absolutely. And one of the arguments against homosexuality and recognizing homosexual unions, you see it on the posters. Procreation, not recreation. Well, I'm sorry, what the hell is wrong with recreation? Like, why did we decide that procreation is more important?
Yeah, the last time I checked, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was, something we were all endowed with and are inalienable rights.
I think anytime we start doing stuff outside the box, a lot of people are going to question it. Like, I don't know, like for me, I'm trying to get rid of the relationship escalator with seeking out newer relationships and things of that sort. And I run into a lot of people who are so used to, like, okay, like, what does this mean? Like, I want to establish a milestone. Why establish a milestone if the communication isn't there? It doesn't make any freaking sense. But like, we like establishing milestones, and we like celebrating that. And it seems like sometimes that takes over the whole idea behind having those. Like, we just want to have that instant gratification thing, and we totally forget about the process of actually getting there. And
Yes, this is, so you just said something really that I found really important. You said whenever people do something outside the box. Well, this essay is telling you that you get to define the box, right? This is giving you a new box to play in, and play is okay. And we're getting close to the end. So Wendy, will you take these two paragraphs, please?
Let therefore the magician divest himself of all preconceptions as to the nature of his true will, but apply himself eagerly to increasing his potential. In this discipline, moreover, he is beginning to fit himself for that very abdication of all that he has and all that he is, which is the essence of the oath of the abyss. Thus do we find one more of those paradoxes which are the images of the truth of the supernals. By destroying our own highest morality and relying upon our natural instinct as the sole guide, we come unaware upon the most simple and the most sublime of all ethical and spiritual conceptions.
I loved that he used abdicate to describe the oath of the abyss, because in shorthand, the oath of the abyss is you give up absolutely everything, pour it all into the cup of Babylon, and stay attached to nothing at all whatsoever. Abdication is ordinarily a word that's used to talk about a ruler who has stepped down from the throne. So, in the last paragraph, when he's talking about the images of the truth of the supernals, right? That's the three of the top Sephiroth across the abyss, right? By destroying our own highest morality and just relying on nature. We got a simple sublime, ethical, and spiritual conception. Questions, comments, rude remarks before I move into the end notes?
Yeah, this kind of makes me feel like I jumped the gun, at least on the second thing I said. And it's definitely parallel with what Thomas told me.
Right?
You know, Crowley's writings have a cadence to them, and usually about 1/4 of the way through whatever we're reading, somebody's going to get pissed off. That's just kind of like how that's how he takes you on the journey. He gets you invested, and then clarifies things, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can deal with this now.
So I thought I would run through a few other references to energy because, again, Crowley's writings tend to refer to each other and the concepts that are interwoven. So this will also give you some additional food for thought. Let's look at energy in the holy books of Thelema, because I have this book called The Concordance that shows me where every word appears. Psych, the word energy does not appear a single time in any of the holy books. So I was like, well, damn. Where else am I going to look? The Book of Lies is another book I happen to be reading and a little project I'm working on. And there are several references to energy. In the very first section, called The Chapter That Is Not a Chapter, there's a description of the second triad, and I put the second triad in blue here. So we have the three sopranos at the top, and then we have the second triad. And Crowley says in this chapter that is not a chapter, God is concealed in the whirling energy of capital N nature. Energy also appears in the Sabbath of the Goat. The second line is Pan in Greek letters, duality, energy, death. And Crowley describes A by its shape is the pentagram, energy. Later on in the essay, in this essay, piece, poem, whatever you'd like to call it, life and death are the two names of A. And in the commentary, which is what's in italics on the right, Crowley writes, it is then asserted that the ultimate letter A, which we know by its shape, the pentagram's energy, has two names or phases, life and death. The third essay that includes the word energy is the stag beetle. Perhaps I shouldn't call them essays. The third section. However, the word energy does not appear in the work itself. It appears in the commentary. So the way that the Book of Lies is organized, for those of you that are not familiar with it, is there's on the left page is a little essay or poem, if you will, and on the right page, the right side of the page is a commentary on it, so that as you're reading, you have material on the left and notes on the right. And in the notes on the stag beetle, Crowley noted that the stag beetle is a reference to Khepra, the Egyptian god of midnight, who bears the sun through the underworld. But this work is called the stag beetle to emphasize its horns. Horns are the universal hieroglyph of energy, particularly the phallic energy. And I cannot resist making a comment about the folks that broke into the Capitol earlier this week. I'm the one who was photographed many times with a buffalo head thing and lots big giant horns, and I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on that one. So works consulted here. I looked primarily at Crowley's little essays at the Book of Lies, my OED, my personal little Bible, Oxford Reference Online, because they have excellent etymologies, and the concordance to the holy books. As promised, for further reading, you may want to take a look at an essay called The Formula of the Tetragrammaton in the Gnostic Mass. That at the beginning of this essay, Crowley said that energy is the sacramental motive of event. And then he says, by the way, you might want to look at the Tetragrammaton in this aspect. Also, Crowley wrote about the Tetragrammaton in Magic and Theory and Practice, Chapter 3, and in the Book of Thoth, Part 1, Section 2, and Part 2, Section 0. You can look at the Book of Lies for the full text of the three pieces that I excerpted at the end here. And you also may want to take a look at Liber 811, which is called Energized Enthusiasm. And while it does not use the word energy, this is an essay about Kundalini energy that you may find interesting in light of this particular essay. Thank you all for coming to today's class and discussion and for jumping in and participating. If you are not a member of Sekhet-Maat, again, we would greatly appreciate your donation of $10 or whatever you've got to offer. And you can always find out more about what Sekhet-Maat is up to at pdxoto.org. And with that, I'm going to quit recording and stop screen sharing.